everybody, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Debating Metal. I'm Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, along with my co-host Chris Kaye. This week we have an awesome episode for you. We are taking a look at heavy metal supergroups.
Collaborations in music have always been a thing, but in heavy metal, bands were usually very tight-knit and competitive with each other, especially back in the 80s. In recent times, however, due to the downturn of importance of the record company, musicians have been collaborating more and more with each other than they ever have before.
And speaking of record companies, since many of them no longer offer big money contracts, lots of musicians have side projects or even have side projects from their side projects. Today, we're taking a look at supergroups that succeeded, some that didn't, and some that were just not so super. So, Chris, heavy metal supergroups, they range from the early 80s to today. Most of today now, there's a lot of bands out there today that are, I don't know if you want to call them supergroups now, but there's just so many people that are just collaborating with each other. It's crazy.
Yeah, the criteria to be a supergroup, I guess, technically would be something around you have a few members from several bands or just a couple that have come together for a different project, usually a side project, like you said. But, there's a lot of, you look at it today, there's a lot of artists that just have a lot of side projects.
Like Mike Portnoy?
Mike Portnoy, Tim Ripper Owens. On the kind of the other end of the spectrum, just a guy that just needs to constantly stay busy for his mind is Mike Patton, that we've talked about recently. Mike Patton has like 478 bands.
Oh, wait. Ripper Owens gotta have more than that. He's gotta have at least 526.
He's been in a couple supergroups. I don't think we're going to talk about any of them today, but he's been in a couple little ones too. So
what we're going to talk about today is more of mostly mainstream. There's a couple of ones that are a little bit outside of the mainstream if you want to talk about it like that. But essentially some of these are most of these people you're going to know. Most of these acts you're going to know. So why don't we go ahead and get started? We're going to go do the not so super groups that kind of failed almost out of the gate. And then some of them actually had some success, but they got stunted or something in their lives happened to end the group or something happened tragically. So let's take a look at some of these bands.
What kind of sparked this thought in my mind for this episode was a band called Hsas, which is Hagar, Sean, Aronson, and Shreve. They were a group formed in 1983, but only lasted to 1984, and that is, you could probably guess, Sammy Hagar, who had previously been in Montrose and done some solo work up to this point, Neil Sean from Journey, and before that he was in Santana, Kenny Aronson, who was a bass guitar player for Rick Derringer, and Michael Shreve, who played with Santana. They only put out that one album, which was Through the Fire in 1984. This, honestly, I remember finding this album back in the record store days. I had gone to my local record store. I was always looking for new stuff. It was a different, venue than what it is now, where you can really look up anything and find it online. A lot of times now, the accessibility for digital downloads is just astronomical, or streaming, so compared to what it was back then. So you couldn't find this on iTunes or anything like that. So I actually found this on CD in a store, and I was really excited because you see, Journey, Montrose, or you know him from Van Halen at that point, but like you see all these guys and it's like, wow, this is going to be awesome. And honestly, the album, it's all right. I think for the most part, like its bit of notoriety really just came from the names of these guys. They really only had one single, and I believe it was a cover. It's an all right album. It's just nothing like you would think it would be with the names that are attached to it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I remember when this album was highly anticipated. I remember when this album came out, and it really didn't go anywhere. I believe because of the names of Sammy Hagar and Neil Schon, there was an expectation that it was going to be this pretty much a hard rocker, even though Neil Schon was not necessarily hard rock. I mean, Journey is not hard rock. Journey is a rock band, but they're not a hard rock band. And
no, but there's some crossover with the fan base.
There is a little bit, and then Sammy Hagar being a little bit more hard rock, basically in comparison. I think there was a lot of anticipation, and for whatever reason, the music just didn't come across that great. I never caught on to it. Oddly enough, though, I bought that album like within the last year or so.
Oh, really?
Yeah, okay. from half price books for like $5.99 or something like that. So I have the vinyl, which is weird, and I just got it literally for the novelty of it, because I know I started picking up some Sammy Hagar albums through half price books. I picked up VOA. I picked up a couple of others. So I have I upped my Sammy collection by like 1,000% just with those few records. So I never got into this. This was one of these albums I just never got into. So I literally have the vinyl just for the novelty of it.
Yeah, I mean, I completely get that. I was kind of excited about it, because if you look at the back of it, it says produced by Hagar and Schon. So you kind of get that idea, like, oh wow, this is going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, but it was a disappointment ultimately.
Yeah, and the project didn't last very long, so it's not like you really did much else. Sammy Hagar went within 2 years to go to Van Halen. Obviously, Neil Schon has continued with Journey all this time. I'm not too sure about the other two guys, but they've also, from what I saw during my research, was they've gone on for many years, continued their music career, so it didn't stunt them or anything. It wasn't a setback of any type. It's just a project that didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, Neil Schon, for whatever reason, has this immense amount of creativity, and he needs to get it out, because he did several albums with John Hammer, the keyboardist. So they did that, several albums together. And I think they actually got back together recently because of the anniversary of that first album of theirs. So that was something that happened for Neil throughout the 80s. He was always trying to collaborate with somebody. Okay, so continuing on the Sammy Hagar kick that we're on here, he's had several projects over the years outside of Van Halen, and they weren't necessarily while he was in Van Halen, but after he left Van Halen. And one of the ones that came up, and this is more recent, this began in 2008, I'm talking about his project Chickenfoot. I mean, that was a full-blown band. And Chickenfoot consisted of Sammy Hagar, which we just spoke about, Joe Satriani, everyone knows the guitar player, and he was never in any other band, and he was just basically a guitarist who started doing those guitar solo albums, instrumentals. Michael Anthony on bass, we all know who Michael is from Van Halen, and then Chad Smith, the drummer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So that is Chickenfoot. And the only time they had someone else in the band was Chad. I believe it was during the Chickenfoot 3 tour. Chad couldn't tour, so they picked up Kenny Aronoff as a drummer. But that's one of the reasons why the band is kind of not together now, because they want to be... Sammy wants it to be just the original 4 guys. He doesn't want anybody else other than Chad playing drums, Joe on guitar, Michael on bass, and him singing. So anyhow, the band released 2 albums. They released their first album, Chickenfoot, and then they released their not necessarily sophomore album, Chickenfoot 3. If anyone knows the jokes out there, if anybody follows Sammy Hagar at all, they were so excited about their second album that they did not want to go through a sophomore slump, but they were so excited that they just wanted to jump right to the third album, so they named it 3 instead of naming it Chickenfoot 2. The albums were okay. They had 1 or 2 good songs that were adequate, I guess you could say. And that's part of the reason why they didn't sell well. There was not a really super standout track that took radio by storm or anything like that. And so they really just kind of wallowed in the mire. They didn't really do much as far as sales was concerned, as far as excitement to see them tour. So Sammy kind of got a little bit discouraged, and they, because Chad couldn't tour with them, they've really not gotten back together since then. Have you listened to any of their music?
Oh yeah. I was pretty excited about it when the first album came out. I enjoyed it. I liked a few of the tracks on there. I would say specifically, what was it called? Oh Yeah was one that really stuck out to me. There was a few good tracks on there, but it wasn't, it wasn't Van Halen. It wasn't, some of Sammy's solo stuff. And a lot of times when you get these virtuoso guitar players on there, the songs aren't necessarily super memorable, which is always a downside to it. But I did like them. I thought they were good. I was a little disappointed that they didn't continue on. They released 2 albums, pretty much not back to back, but within 2 years, I guess, and then just disappeared. So I get it that they're not going to get back together without Chad Smith, but I guess they just never really stuck out enough to me to be like super sad that they're not back together. I
mean, I think that's the biggest thing that really discouraged Sammy, was the fact that they didn't really take off. He was so excited about the band, and yeah. I mean, when you think about it on the surface, it's really cool to see those 4 guys together, but the music wasn't super stellar, and that was part of it. I mean, I like the song Bigfoot. I like that All Right song. The Oh Yeah song. I also liked All Right, All Right. That was a pretty cool song. But in reality, I mean, over 2 albums, and you've got maybe 4 decent songs, 5. It's a tough one to sell to the general public, especially at a time when album sales were declining, and that's the tough part. It was, I think, bad timing to get super excited about that.
And it was, you're coming off of the last breakup, 2004, where Van Halen separated from Sammy at pretty bad terms, kicked Michael out, just, I don't know. It was kind of you expected more, I guess, from it, and maybe they were coming off of those kind of bad vibes, and it's been it was not the greatest project, but it was still a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. All right, what do we got next?
Let's talk about Symphonia. Now, a lot of people probably might not know Symphonia, but if you're into power metal, South American power metal, or even Scandinavian, then this is like a major supergroup. You have Andre Matos from Angra, Timo Tolkki from Stratovarius, Jari. This is going to be a tough one. Jari Kainulainen.
Sounds about right.
From Stratovarius. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing these. Mikko Harkin from Sonata Arctica, and Uli Kirsch from Holy Moses, Gamma Ray, and Halloween. Now, those are German bands, if you're familiar with Halloween. He was a longtime drummer, as well as Gamma Ray, which was their original singer's project after he left Halloween. So, Angra, huge South American power metal band. Andre Matos was their original singer. Timo Tolkki was the guitarist and mastermind behind Stratovarius for most of their career. I guess not technically at this point, but at the time that the band came out would be, because it's been 10 years now. Symphonia was around from 2010 to 2011. They only put out 1 album called In Paradisium. And I thought it was a pretty good album. I didn't think it was amazing, but this was a huge shocker because they put out the album, and within a couple months, Timo Tolkki disbanded the band. he basically just sent everybody an email and said, "This isn't working out. I don't think it's as good as it could have been. It's over." And this was kind of following his exit from Stradivarius, where he said he was retiring from music. And then he basically said the same thing again. "I'm going to retire from music. This isn't working out for me." And then he's gone on to continue his own solo side project all this time since. So he was obviously going through some things, but it really shocked and upset the other members of the band. And it was just kind of a shocker as a fan, too, because I remember being pretty excited about this. Andre Matos did those first few Angra albums, and his voice is just really angelic. He has such a high range. He has ability to go pretty low as well. Like, he has a very, very dynamic range. And, I hadn't really seen much of him since. He'd done some other stuff kind of outside the genre of metal, or not necessarily outside, but more operatic kind of stuff. And then to see him back in a major project like this was kind of exciting. And then it just dies right off the bat.
I don't know anything about Symphonia. I do know, I've heard of Andre Matos. I've heard of Timo. But I never really got into this or had heard about it. It came out at a time I was already here in Texas, 2011, but it wasn't something, I guess, that I knew anything about at the time. So this is, it's hard for me to explain.
I think the most important thing to take away from this was because, like, this was a project that could have been a lot bigger than it was, and it just, I swear, within months, it was just done. It was over. No more touring. No more promotion. Nothing. It was over.
That's weird. I mean, that is absolutely strange. That something like that would happen. Yeah, I'm definitely going to give this a listen to, because I have been, touching a little bit more on power metal than I have, in the last few years. So that is something I do have some interest in. So I want to check this out. That'd be pretty interesting to listen to.
I think it's worth it. It's just sad because it's like, it's such a brief thing. The only thing that I would say is this late in Andre's career, he doesn't have quite the power that he had when he was younger, but that's going to happen when you're singing in those really extremely high registers, kind of like Jeff Tate, where Jeff Tate's voice is not as strong as it used to be. He still can sing very well, but he just doesn't have that. He got older. So that's the only thing. So if you go back and listen to Angra, you're going to be even more blown away by his singing ability.
I'll definitely check it out. I mean, we've talked about Angra so many times. I'm just like, I need to listen to them more often. Okay, well, that brings us to a band that it's hard to explain. They've had a lot of members, and they've had a lot of turmoil in their career. And the band I'm talking about is Adrenaline Mob. They formed in 2011. They formed with Russell Allen on vocals, Mike Orlando on guitar, Rich Ward on guitar, and then they also had Paul DeLeo on bass, as well as Mike Portnoy on drums. And that was the original band. And then, Paul DeLeo and Rich Ward went on to go to do Fozzy with Chris Jericho. John Moyer joined the band from Disturbed. So they've had a kind of like an in and out with their band members. So I'm looking at my list here, and apparently I thought that Michael Anthony was in the band, but he wasn't. I left him on the list of bass players that performed in Adrenaline Mob, but Michael Anthony did not play in
That's just a copy and paste there. That's hilarious.
And then the drummer who replaced Mike Portnoy was AJ Pirro. So now, to getting to the point where there was some some tough luck for this band. In the middle of the tour in 2015, AJ Pirro passes away of a heart attack. And so that leaves them kind of high and dry. And then they get back together. They get Jordan Kanata on drums, and they are on tour in 2017. And they get into a bus accident. Well, no, it's not a bus accident. Let me see. Their bus or RV gets a flat. They pull over to the side of the highway, and they're on I-75 in Florida, and they get hit by a tractor trailer. An 18-wheeler hits them and kills the touring bass player that they had. He was John Moyer had left the band, and then this guy David Zabludowski was killed. And the tour manager, Janet Jane Train Rains, she had some third-degree burns and some injuries. She ended up passing away 5 weeks after that accident. So between 2015, when AJ Pirro passes away, and then this bus accident on the side of the road, where they lost another member and a member of their touring party, they've had some bad luck and some tragedy. And I believe it was Mike Orlando who took a couple years to recuperate from some of his injuries, either him or Russell Allen. I can't remember which one it was. And technically they're still together, but I recently read in an interview, I think Russell said that he has no burning desire to put the band back together, even though they're technically considered still an active band, which is weird. If you have no interest in putting it together, just say it's over and then done with. That's it. I mean, the music was good. You know, it's unfortunate. The music to me is outstanding. I actually love their covers EPs. They had two really good covers EPs. But musically, I mean, it was good stuff, but it wasn't necessarily mainstream metal. It wasn't, the ones with the great amount of hooks. Did you check out any of their albums?
I did. I remember when they were forming, was around the time that I was watching That Metal Show, and they had Mike Portnoy on there daily. He's good friends with Eddie Trunk, so yeah, he's going to be on there all the time. I was a fan of Symphony X all throughout high school to now. So I was interested. So I've heard some of the earlier stuff. I really honestly kind of dropped off from them, I would say probably after the second album. I just haven't, just things happen in your life, you get busy, and I just kind of lost track of them.
Yeah, I mean, and they've had so much, kind of a start stop type of career in the 20 teens, that it was hard to keep up with them, really. So, and with the revolving circle of musicians, a lot of times that turns people off. When
styles change, etc.
Yeah, and like when I was a kid and I would read a magazine. Now, obviously today's world is different. You follow online magazines or you follow online websites. The same way that I did as a kid, you get a magazine at the store and you say, okay, so you got this new album's coming out, because you see the advertisement, and then you see an interview and it says, oh, well, this guy's out of the band and we've got this new member. Sort of like, Van Halen and Sammy Hagar and all that stuff. And when you deal with this, so our original guitar player and original bassist is gone. They're in another band. We bring up this guy who's not leaving his main band, talking about John Moyer, but he's going to be our touring thing. So basically, John Moyer is playing bass for Adrenaline Mob on the side. So essentially, Adrenaline Mob is a side project, and it's also a side project for Symphony X. But Symphony X wasn't a major touring act, so who was more important? It's one of those weird things.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I thought the music was cool. I mean, I really love their cover of "Devil Went Down to Georgia." They did a really cool Black Sabbath medley. They did Barracuda.
The Barracuda's actually really cool.
It is very cool. It's just odd that it's a guy singing.
Yeah.
And they did a cover of a song that we're going to talk about from a band we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So we'll kind of touch upon that in a little bit. But so I really like their covers albums, but the regular stuff I for me, it didn't hook me enough to say, "Oh yeah, I want to listen to this." But it was
fair.
decent. Yeah, so it was decent. All right, what do you got next?
I'm going to talk about one. This one won't take very long, but this was another band that kind of formed and then fizzled out real quick. This is Contraband. They formed in 1990 and 1991, or to 1991. This really was kind of formed by Bobby Blotzer and Cher Peterson from Vixen. They had played an unplugged session at the same time on MTV and thought, let's do something together. Well, they ended up getting Tracy Guns from LA Guns, Michael Schenker from Scorpions and UFO and his own solo projects, and Richard Black from Shark Island. And they formed this band, Contraband. They only put out one album in 1991, and the odd thing to me was I look at the track listing and the songwriting credits, and not a single song is written by the members of the band. This is a truly studio-produced band. This is, not them getting together and being a band. And I think that kind of rings very true when you listen to the music. It doesn't feel cohesive. It doesn't feel like they're all really excited or into it. And there's only a couple, decent songs on the album. And it's just, it's a bunch of covers and then some songs that were written for them. And so they, got pretty poor reviews, mixed to poor, and just disbanded it within the year.
I remember when they came out. So if you look at the timeline, 1990 to 1991, what was happening in 1990 and 1991? Grunge was starting to come up. And hair bands were starting to become out of fashion, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
If you look at it, 1990, think about Rat had already run its course. They were on their 5th album, I think, and they just weren't doing good anymore. Vixen had released their 2 albums, but the second one tanked, so there was not much there for them. Michael Schenker was always just doing his own thing, and even LA Guns had two pretty decent albums in a row, and then just kind of nothing came of it after that. So they all had time on their hands, and you mentioned the credits, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, that's pretty crazy that actually. Richard Black did have one songwriting credit on the
one songwriting credit,
and it was probably barely anything. And it's just really weird. I mean, they did covers. That's obvious. They did at least 3 covers. So I'm just like, why bother? It doesn't make sense. If you're of this band, like especially with a Tracy Guns and Michael Schenker, how are you not sitting there writing your own music? I'm really surprised that Schenker's even a part of this because of the fact that there's nothing with his name on it in terms of songwriting. It's just very strange, but whatever.
I will say that their cover of All the Way from Memphis is actually really good and has 2 or 3 really good solos on it. It's the only track that really stands out to me and that I really enjoy on this album. So.
I mean, this to me was sort of like this guy who Spencer Sercombe was the musical director of this project. So this seems to me like something like he was friends with everybody and he's like, hey, let's get in the studio and I got some songs, we can record them. And they're like, yeah, sure. And they did it. So it was kind of weird. I remember the All the Way from Memphis video and the single and all that stuff, and it just as good as it was, to me there was no the camaraderie wasn't there.
Yeah.
And the chemistry, that's the word I was looking for. Chemistry wasn't there for this band, and that's why they didn't go nowhere.
It just felt very manufactured.
No, of course. I mean, if you look even look at the cover of the album, it has a picture of tour cases, equipment cases, and it has each of the members' bands' logos on the album cover.
And they're in the music video for All the Way from Memphis as well. They flash across the screen.
So it's kind of weird, and and it's odd that they were all able to get together because they just knowing these record companies, they were all different record companies. Rat was on Atlantic, LA Guns was on Polygram, Vixen was on EMI, MSG. I don't know what Macaulay Schenker was on at the time, and I have no idea what the hell Richard Black was with Shark Island. That just sounds like a bad TV show. So, I don't know. But anyway,
welcome to Shark Island. Our contestants will be eaten by sharks if they don't,
Exactly. All right. Well, we mentioned before, Adrenaline Mob did a cover of a song from a band that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about that band now. And this is going to lead into the middle ground of some of these supergroups we're talking about. And the reason why I left these guys for last in the failed category is because me personally, I don't think this was a failure because there was some other extenuating circumstances.
The reason I listed them, let me preface this, as a failure, because there are extenuating circumstances, like you said. But the problem is they never took off the ground, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and some things that, as we talk about it, you'll understand exactly why they were never going to go anywhere.
Right, and I get that. So, and it's tough because as a fan, because I was a big fan of Badlands.
Great band.
We're talking about Badlands. So for those of you who don't know who Badlands are, or is, or was, if you want to put it that way, Badlands was a band that formed in 1988. It was formed by Jakey Lee of Ozzy Osbourne fame. We all know him. Ray Gillen, who was a former singer temporarily of Black Sabbath for a very short while. It also had Eric Singer on drums. And he was from Alice Cooper fame, Black Sabbath fame, and later on went on to join Kiss after he left Badlands. And then Greg Chason was the bass player, and Greg went on to do other things. But and then after Eric left, Jeff Martin joined the band, and Jeff Martin was from Racer X, and he was also, I believe, Jeff Martin used to be a singer, and then decided to play drums on this project. When I first saw this band, I was a huge fan. I loved that first album. I actually loved both their first two albums. Now, I'm only going by the two albums because the third one was a demos album that came out after Ray Gillen had passed away, and that's part of the reason why they are a failure. I get that.
About 5 years after, because it came out in 1998. Ray Gillen passed away in 1993, so this was just one last thing, like, hey, let's release it, might as well.
Yeah, and there was a lot of people that was trying to get Jake to basically reform Badlands, and I think for Jake, he just didn't want to do it without Ray. But their first album was killer. It had a great single, Dreams in the Dark, but the song High Wire is the one that Adrenaline Mob cover, and that's the opening song on this album. That's an incredible song. But you probably have some more information you want to talk about as to why they failed.
I mean, it's specifically the fact that they started off, very strong. Then they fired Eric Singer, so they lost some of that chemistry. And then Ray Gillen was very sick through the latter part of their career. Basically, at the end of their time together, they lost their recording contract. Again, Ray Gillen was very sick, and it was just bad luck after bad luck after bad luck. I think Ray Gillen went on to do like a solo album with George Lynch, and that was about it. And then he passed away. So it was just a lot of unfortunate circumstances that led to them, really never taking off. And it's unfortunate, like I said, because the first album is really great. Voodoo Highway is also good, but that first self-titled album, I think, is pretty phenomenal. Dreams in the Dark hit number 38 on the U.S. rock charts. Winter's Call is a really good song. Then they had The Last Time, Whiskey Dust. I mean, they had some really good tracks, and just timing and bad luck, I think, just really made them fail.
That was part of it. From my understanding, too, is that Jake was very stubborn about the direction of this band. So you
Yes.
sign up at the end of the 80s. You get signed by a record company. Now, Paul O'Neill was the producer, I believe, of the first album. And Paul O'Neill is also famous for doing stuff with Sabotage and Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he's got this whole thing. They put this album together, and then they're like, all right, we need a single. And they have this song, Dreams in the Dark. It was a song that Jake did not want to do. He did not want a crossover single, but they forced him to do it. And it's like, do you want a recording contract or you don't want a recording contract? Do you want to be famous or you don't want to be famous? Do you want to have a band or you don't want to have a band? That's literally the tug and pull between the record company and the band. And, you can be stubborn about certain things, but man, give into it. So they do it, they tour, they kind of, they have a hit single. It was a great video, great song. The album is great. And then they get to their second album. And when I put the second album in, I was like, man, I love the production on it. And the songs are a lot more heavy blues based, blues metal, blues rock, whatever you want to call it. And I remember listening, reading or seeing interviews with Jakey Lee saying that they spent a ton of money to make it sound cheap.
Yeah. It does. It sounds a lot different. Yeah.
It's very dry. It's very raw. They put it. They triggered the drums to make sure that it was always the perfect sound. But it sounds great. There's nothing wrong with it. But it is very, very raw sounding. It's like almost not production value wise, but the rawness. It's very similar to Saint Anger, how it's just so raw. Or just the way, I guess not Saint Anger so much as the way James does his vocals now, which is super dry. Right. That's the way this album is. It's just very dry. But at the same time, it's really good. They got some good songs. And they do a killer version of Fire and Rain, the James Taylor song, which James Taylor had denounced. He did not want them to do the song, but they did it anyway, and he got pissed off about it. Well, too bad.
That's a good reason. I'm not a big James Taylor fan. So my dad always really liked James Taylor, and he has a song on this one CD my dad had, and I wish I knew what it was, but he sings this song and he's talking about sweet potato pie, and it just goes like sweet potato pie now, and ever since that, like, we've just died. And he plays it like every time I'm on a long road trip or something with him. He puts that on just to, remind me of that song. But back to Badlands. The second album's very bluesy. Yes, a huge change in the sound. A lot different than your typical 80s metal sound, which was kind of on the first album. So, more in the direction of what he wanted. But again, Ray Gillen by 1990 was diagnosed with, he had AIDS, and he really declined in health very quickly. And even just at the very beginning of their career, already sick, and it just that's a death sentence. Not only, and I don't mean that in a I'm sorry for the way that came out, but like for the band, it is, because that's the face of the band, and I can understand Jakey Lee not wanting to continue without him, because that's their sound, that's the band.
Yeah, exactly. I got to see Badlands in a small club in 1991. Jake and Greg and Jeff and Ray. Ray, it was just amazing. And to know that he was basically dying at that point.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. He would live for another 2 years, but it's still just a sad thing to kind of know that was, not a long time left to live. The one really cool thing, before we go on to something, to the next category, basically, there's a song on here called "In a Dream," and I'm being a big fan me being a big fan of Badlands. this song ends the album. It's completely a cappella. It's Ray Gillen's voice. It's just a beautiful, tiny a cappella song. And I say tiny because it's short. And Badlands is not this big national act. You know, there's a small core of us fans that know this band. And in 2005, American Idol contestant Bo Bice does a version of that song as his song of the week or whatever it is. And I was like a little kid. Now, in 2005, I was already 26 years old, right? 26? No, 36. And dude, I was in front of the TV like a little kid, glued, because I'm like, I could not believe that someone else knew this song. Because it was the last song on the album.
It's funny.
And I was like, glued to it. I'm like, I cannot believe this. This is amazing, you know? And but of course, you know, I'm like one of 10 people that know that shit.
I'm sure it's more. But
yeah, I'm sure it's more.
One last note on Ray Gillen, even though there's not a lot of material out there with him on it, Black Sabbath did eventually release a deluxe edition of Eternal Idol, which has his original vocals on it, as well as Tony Martin's on separate discs. So that is worth checking out. There was a bootleg that went around for years, and I had that, but now you can actually get an official release with better sound quality. Very cool.
That's very cool. Yeah, very cool. Is Eric Singer on any official release?
Yeah, he's on Eternal Idol, and there was another one. He was on Seventh Star.
Ah, okay, gotcha. All right. Well, so as we were talking about, you know, the bands that failed, and Badlands, between their attitude towards the record company and the fact that Ray passes away, they were promising. They just did not get past that next level. So now we're going to get to that next level, which is the bands that kind of somewhat made it and somewhat had some success. And what do you have for that?
So I'm going to start off with Black Country Communion. They were a band that formed in 2009 and lasted till 2013 on their original run, and then has reformed since in 2016 and to now, even though they've kind of taken a break due to the pandemic. That was formed by Glenn Hughes and Joe Bonamassa. Glenn Hughes of Trapeze, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, etc. You know, so many different bands. Joe Bonamassa mostly did solo work. Jason Bonham on drums of Bonham, Foreigner, and the Led Zeppelin reunions, the son of John Bonham. And Derek Sherinian, who was in Dream Theater, Alice Cooper, Yngwie Malmsteen, again, etc. So definitely a super group in all senses of the word. They've released 4 albums: Black Country Communion, Black Country Communion 2, Afterglow, and those were the first 3 releases from 2010, 2011, and 2012. And then since they've reformed, they've released BCC 4, I guess technically. It's in Roman numerals, and that was in 2017. So the reason I put them in the middle was because that first album was really well received. The second album was too as well, but that first album was really good. And the band definitely felt like they were on track, and they were, you know, doing really well. By the time Afterglow came out, though, the Joe Bonamassa had kind of like, you know, he wanted to go back to doing his solo stuff. They couldn't fulfill certain commitments because of his overlapping schedule with his solo stuff, and it was very obvious that he was kind of checked out by that point. And Glenn Hughes and he had some really strong disagreements. You know, Joe Bonamassa said he was bullying him into trying to finish the commitments, but, you know, I can understand that from that perspective, but he also had his own stuff going on. So, you know, there was some miscommunication, just bad communication going on. And so they just kind of fizzled out. But luckily, within a couple of years, they got back together. They worked out all their differences, and they put out BCC4. And it's, again, a really good album. this is a little bit different than the normal stuff we would talk about. We don't typically talk about, black country communion and bands of their ilk, but I think this is a good way that we can kind of get that in, because it is more of a hard rock, blues rock band, but these are icons in the industry as well, and it's worth talking about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Glenn Hughes is an absolute icon in the music industry and in the hard rock and even in part of the heavy metal world. When you think about it, I mean, he was in Deep Purple
and Black Sabbath.
And Black Sabbath, and he was in Black Sabbath as a singer. So that, did he play bass on?
No,
that was he on the seventh? Yeah, so he was just there as a singer.
Yeah,
and the same thing kind of happened because it was a weird thing. He was hired to Deep Purple, and he thought he was going to get the singing gig, and then they bring in this young stud of a singer, David Coverdale. And so they shared singing duties in Deep Purple, him and David, Glenn and David. But eventually, David was the singer. But that collaboration or that friendship that they developed in Deep Purple has lasted to this day. I mean, they are super tight friends. Mm-hmm. Glenn has had an illustrious career, but at the same time, he has had a crazy career with the amount of drug addiction, or not the amount, the drug addiction that he went through. And I mean, he's said it himself, he shouldn't be here, but he is, and he's making the best of everything now. And the guy's voice still holds up to this day. And that is the crazy part about it, because his voice is just amazing.
I think his voice was at the worst in the late 80s because he had gained weight and was dealing with drug addiction or maybe not addiction at that time, but the side effects, etc. But yeah, he had some really severe, I think he was overheating at the Black Sabbath shows, and he had to take time off and this and that, and it just he's really turned his life around, and he's doing great now.
Oh yeah, I mean, and the guy's almost 70 years old or something like that.
Yeah, he's 70, I believe. Yeah,
so that's crazy. He is 70 right now, and he still looks good. So that's the crazy part. And I got into this first album, Black Country Communion. I thought it was a pretty good hard rock album. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, shit, I listened to the Black Crowes, so it's the same style. Maybe this is probably a little bit heavier than that.
Yeah. I just really like Glenn Hughes' voice. He's got a great voice and a very unique sound.
Yeah, and another thing that came out of that too was because of them being kind of on hold for a little bit, Glenn formed another side project, because that's all he does, really. He formed a side project with Jason Bonham called California Breed, another hard rock project. So Glenn Hughes, and this has turned into more of a Glenn Hughes thing because of who he is, has collaborated with everybody. And he has all these side projects. Right now he has the Dead Daisies. I mean, that's just, that they just released a new album like a week or two ago, something like that, or a month ago. So yeah, I mean, he's always doing something. So Black Country Communion was pretty cool at the time. And I think that the whole thing with Joe Bonamassa was that Joe wanted to go back to being just a blues player, mm-hmm. blues guitarist. And Joe's his own guy. I mean, Joe's his own leader. He's the band leader. And so I think he wanted to expand his horizon, and he joined Black Country Communion and had the project. But in reality, it wasn't who he was, and I think that's the reason why he pulled back on it. And so Glenn guilted him into finishing up another album, but I don't see that coming to fruition.
Well, no, that's not 100% true, because he did leave and then he came back. He wanted to come back by that point. They kind of worked out their differences. So they really only put things on hold at this point due to the pandemic. So there is possible. They've talked about putting a new album out, and they were going to, they started production, I believe, in 2020, but everything just kind of went sideways because of the pandemic.
Okay, gotcha. And speaking of Derek Sherinian, I mean, he was also a touring keyboardist for Kiss at one point.
Oh,
so that's
okay.
That's an interesting thing too. All right. I'm going to bring up Sammy Hagar again and The Circle. Now this time, it's funny if you start listening. If anybody's catching everybody that we're talking about, there's a lot of people. This is almost like the 6 degrees of separation of Sammy Hagar or Glenn Hughes or Jason Bonham, because this is
Michael Anthony, who is in
Michael Anthony.
Adrenaline.
It's just he's on my list. He's not necessarily in the band, but they do need a bass player. Shit, I'm sorry. That was uncalled for.
Well, I mean, I don't think it was meant in ill will.
No, but it's technically true.
It is.
So anyhow, Sammy Hagar formed The Circle after Chickenfoot kind of went on hiatus. And The Circle started as a jam of Sammy, Michael, Vic Johnson, which is his guitar player from Sammy Hagar and the Wabaritas, and Jason Bonham, and Jason Bonham just plays, you tell him to show up and he'll be at your house. I mean, I think if I call him, he'll be here tomorrow. They started this band in 2014, and it started as a cover band. They literally released their first album. It was a live album. They did a tour, and they just played covers of Led Zeppelin and Van Halen and a couple of Sammy Hagar songs. I think maybe 1 or 2 Montrose songs in there. And that is it. That's how the band started. And through their continued collaboration and their continued chemistry, they actually put out an album. And they have since released a few albums. They released Space Between in 2019. So you think about it. 2014 is when they formed. I believe 2015 is when they came out with At Your Service, which was the live album. And then 2019 was their first new music. And then they did Lockdown 2020, which was from the lockdown sessions in 2020. They released in 2021. And now they got a new album coming out called Crazy Times. I like some of the songs on Space Between. And so before I let you take over this thing, the funny note about one song on Space Between is a song called Trust Fund Baby. And that is a blatant ripoff of a Montrose song called I've Got the Fire. So heavy metal fans will know that Iron Maiden covered that song. And Sammy claims since Ronnie Montrose cheated him out of money, he was allowed to rip off his own song because the riff is I've Got the Fire. Dead
it
on.
Is. I was going to mention that, but yeah, that first album's a lot of fun. I kind of like it better than Chickenfoot because I think that Sammy loosened up a little bit. And I think that definitely shows in the sound of The Circle. So, I kind of enjoy it better. I haven't really listened to the newest album, to be honest. I need to. But that Lockdown 2020 is pretty cool. The Space Between, I think, is the best one so far, though.
You mentioned the fact that he seems a little bit looser, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. He has this amazing chemistry with Michael and Vic.
Yeah.
Not Michael Vick, but Michael and Vic. And so Michael Anthony and Vic Johnson. And he's got also an incredible chemistry with Jason Bonham. And that is what shows. You can hear it, you can see it between the four of them, and it's pretty cool. They have a good chemistry in Chickenfoot, but I think it's more, one of these things where it's like, it has to be those four guys, otherwise, they don't have that same chemistry. There's a chemistry between Sammy and Joe Satriani that leads to what they play. But this one is like, they don't care. It's like, this is four guys just hanging around jamming in their sandals,
just having a good time.
Having a good time. And they came up with cool music. That's what that was, So I liked the first album. It's pretty cool. I listened to it for a little bit. The Lockdown Sessions, if anybody followed them on Instagram, they did really cool versions of some Van Halen songs, a lot of other covers. And Vic Johnson's just a beast of a guitar player.
Very good guitar player, yes.
Yeah, and then of course, you can always hear Michael Anthony's background vocals because he's just superior to almost anybody out there.
His background vocals made Van Halen, and I don't mean 100% because all those guys made Van Halen, but that's such a unique sound, and that's something I definitely always associate with Van Halen.
Yep, exactly. And you could tell when he wasn't on a different kind of truth. You could tell the background vocals
it's not the same.
Were they were off. You know. All right. Anyway, all right. So we're gonna go to the next band, and before you introduce this next band, because this is the third and final one that's in the middle. There's an association with one of the bands that we would consider successful. And I think that what's funny about it is that they were both around the same time. Both had different kinds of success, but, you know, one kind of had to stop while the other one didn't have to stop, but eventually were kind of forced to stop. So go ahead and read the next band.
So I'm not sure why this band wasn't bigger. I guess I am sure why this band wasn't bigger than they are, because they should have been successful. They should have been huge. But this is a cautionary tale and why drugs and alcohol can totally derail something and ruin it. This band I was a big fan of when they came out, and that's Velvet Revolver. They came out in 2002. They lasted until 2008, and then they had one-off show in 2012. They were made up of Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots. He was only in the band from 2003 to 2008, and he was kind of the reason why they disbanded, but I'll get into that in a bit. The lead guitar is Slash from Guns N' Roses, obviously.
I thought he was in that band Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators.
Yes, he is also from that band, and Slash's Snake Pit. You had Dave Kushner also on guitars, Duff McKagan and Matt Sorum of Guns N' Roses fame as well. So you basically had Guns N' Roses meet Stone Temple Pilots, and their first album was great. Contraband came out in 2004, had a couple great singles off of it. Slither, I think most people would know, and it was fantastic. But by the time 2007 came around, Libertad came out, and it wasn't quite as good. It was still good album, but Scott Weiland's drug problem really was ramping up, and by 2008 they had broken up. This is from a band that had 5 award nominations, including 2 wins, the Kerrang Awards Best International Newcomer in 2004, and they actually won a Grammy for Slither in 2005. They were on the upward slope, you know, they were doing really well, and then they just dropped off due to really a sad event. I mean, Scott Weiland ended up passing away in 2015, never got over his drug issues. You know, like I said, they reunited for one show in 2012, which was kind of hopeful. Up till that point, they continued to say, because Duff McKagan had appeared in interviews saying, oh yeah, we're still looking for a singer. Once we find that singer, we're going to get back together. This is still going to be a project. And it just never happened. And it's really sad.
They were a really cool band, and I actually saw them twice. I saw them headline a show, and I saw them do, what was it called, Ozfest. So I really enjoyed them, and the first album was amazing. To think the reason why their single "Fall to Pieces" was on that album was because Axl Rose did not like the song and turned it down.
Right
when Slash submitted it to,
and then
Axl.
He puts out Chinese Democracy.
What? I'm sorry, I had a cough. I like Velvet Revolver. They were really cool. You see that combination in the band that we're going to talk about next. Also had the very similar chemistry. That chemistry that they had, you know, this Guns N' Roses, Slash and Duff, which their collaboration is almost inseparable. And then they had this guy that was the drummer for Guns N' Roses and Matt Sorum. You bring in Kushner, who's basically, I don't want to say he's a session musician, but he's been in a few bands in and out of stuff like that. And, you know, the chemistry was amazing, and they did some really good tunes. I mean, you know, Scott's a really good singer. He was a really good musician in general, but he was very eclectic, and he had his demons, you know. And so did Slash, but Slash got over him. So did Duff. So Duff got over him. It was one of those demons that Scott could not get over.
He just couldn't get through it. Yeah,
he couldn't get through it. So, Libertad came out. It wasn't that great of an album. It had its highlights, and that was about it. And that's where you saw the downfall. And I think that's when you saw the smaller crowds coming to the shows. You know, certain times people, and I would say people in general, lose interest in what's going on around them. And I'm talking about the band members, and I'm specifically talking about Scott. You know, you begin to see things in a different way because of what you're going through. And so he was trying to get back into Stone Temple Pilots, and he's trying to do his own solo thing. So it was all over the place, you know. And so with a weak album, and you know, your mind starts to wander. And I think that's where their failure, kind of middling in the road. It should have been better, like you said. Ended up kind of being the demise of the band. And on top of that, with Scott passing away, so that didn't help.
Yeah, I mean, I still think the second album was a really good album. It just wasn't as good, and sometimes that can be as damning as a bad album, you know, because people's expectations just are sometimes very unrealistic. And when you release a first album that's very good, even just being a little bit not worse, I guess a little bit worse would be a sophomore slump. But I mean, She Builds Quick Machines was an awesome song. The Last Flight, man, I'm trying to remember the songs off of the album. Just 16 was really good. I mean, the album was not bad. It's just not as good as Contraband was, which was awesome as a banger.
Exactly. So that leads us now into the successful bands. And I'm going to start off with the successful band because, again, I mentioned at the beginning of the Velvet Revolver thing that there was two bands that kind of collaborated, that kind of came out around the same time. And we're going to talk about Audioslave, which was basically a combination of the band of Rage Against the Machine with Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. Soundgarden had already broken up, and he got together. Chris Cornell got together with, oh Jesus Christ, what's his name? Tom Morello, and they collaborated and put together what I consider to be this amazing, absolutely the perfect blend between these two bands. I mean, the album sounds like Soundgarden meets Rage Against the Machine. There's no other way to put it. It's much like Velvet Revolver sounds like Stone Temple Pilots meets Guns N' Roses. It's just no denying who those musicians are and how they come across. Obviously, Chris Cornell, his voice is associated with Soundgarden. But when you think about Tom Morello, Brad Wilk, and I forget the bass player's name.
It would be Tim Comerford.
Oh, Tim Comerford, or Tim.com is what he calls himself. That, you know, those three guys just are Rage Against the Machine. And when they play together, that is what they sound like. So throw in Chris Cornell, and it's just like exactly that collaboration. I love that first album. I love it. First 7 songs, hands down, awesome.
I like the first album too. I thought they kind of found more of their own sound with Out of Exile, the second album.
They did. They very similar to how Alter Bridge found a different sound after One Day Remains.
Yeah.
Right. You know, so they found, but it's still, when you think about it, it was a uniquely Audioslave sound, but there was that hint of each band in the background, and that's what I liked about it. But the first album, hands down, just like Velvet Revolver's first album, was just solid. I believe Audioslave sold more records. It was a bigger album. I mean, it was enormous. It was huge. I mean, the band went to Cuba on a goodwill mission, and they were the first American musicians to play in Cuba. You know, in God knows how long.
I had forgotten that. That's true.
Oh, that documentary is awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. So I liked it. Out of Exile was a good album. Obviously, to me, it wasn't as good as the first one, but it was still very good. I mean, they had some good songs on it, and they released a couple of good singles, so they kept the momentum going. And Revelations, like you said, they had that sound that they brought from Out of Exile. They had the same sound on Revelations.
I think a lot of people think, either the first album or the second album is the best. Like, it's pretty divisive, but not in a way that's like, this one's the best, like in an angry way. It's just the fans either think that. But Revelations was kind of where it dropped off a little bit, but it's still a good album.
No, it is absolutely a good album. Just that first one was so enormous, I guess you could put it that way. It was so big of an album.
Yeah.
And they did so much off of it that it kind of overshadowed the rest of their career, basically. And then, towards the end of the career, there was that lull in their creativity, their songwriting, and Chris Cornell's desire to do other stuff. It came down to Rage Against the Machine, I believe, reunited at one point, and
they reunited in 2007, I believe, like right after they broke up.
Right, and so Chris Cornell was kind of left with what do I do now type of thing, and he could have continued his solo career, but his solo career wasn't going anywhere, and you can tell that Chris Cornell desired the big stage. So what do? Even though, and this is not a rumor, but this is speculation that I read about. He reached out to his band members in Soundgarden, and they decided at some point they were going to reunite. That was not precipitated by the fact that, hey, I miss you guys, I want to get back together. It was precipitated by the fact that this could be big for us financially, and that's what I kind of understand had led to the reunion of Soundgarden.
Okay.
Chris wasn't doing much, and obviously the guys at Soundgarden weren't doing anything. So, well, Matt Cameron was in Pearl Jam at this point. So that's what I precipitated the reunion for Soundgarden, which is in the end where Chris Cornell ended up passing away on tour with Soundgarden.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah, he passed away in 2017, like you said. Another case of the industry kind of taking it out of somebody.
Yeah, and his was a strange one because he wasn't like on heroin like his friend Andrew Wood was when Andrew died, and he made and Chris Cornell put together Temple of the Dog as a tribute. But it was one of those things where he had some sort of addiction that overtook him, and accidental or not, it was one of those things where it wasn't supposed to happen that way, but it did. And so here we are. And then shortly thereafter, the results of that is what led to Chester Bennington doing something similar.
Yeah.
The music industry is unforgiving, and they don't care, and they continue to feed your addictions no matter what. They don't care. I mean, because it comes down to, we'll go to the next guy, and we'll go to the next guy, and we'll go to the next guy, and they just leave you behind. And it's a nasty, nasty business. Some people can be successful at it and get around it or survive it, one of the two, however you want to look at it. But there are a whole host of talented musicians who succumb to it. And that's just the bad part. And I call it the music industry because it's, it happens in any industry, but music industry is just relentless and they don't give a shit. And it's just tough.
For sure.
But we're here to celebrate the music. So, you have anything else to say on Audioslave?
So I did want to note, the first 2 albums did go platinum. The second album debuted at number 1, becoming their biggest selling album, like right off the bat. And then Revelations did hit gold, as well as their Like a Stone single went gold. So they had some really good accolades.
They Like a Stone, man, that first album was just amazing. I love it.
It's so good.
Not a lot of people sit there, well, it's not Rage Against the Machine. No, it's not. It's not Soundgarden. No, it's not.
No, but Cochise is pretty close to Rage Against the Machine.
Cochise is so awesome. I love that song. All right, what do you got after Audioslave on the successful side?
So I want to talk about a band that was kind of successful in a different part of the world. This is Mr. Big, formed in 1988, that went through 2002, and then reformed in 2009, and then now has gone on an indefinite hiatus, basically ending their career in 2018, and I'll explain that. Eric Martin on vocals. He was a mostly solo act. Paul Gilbert from Racer X. He was in the band until 1999 and then left to go back to Racer X, do his own thing. And at that point, Richie Kotzen, who was in Poison, would fill in for the remainder until 2002. But Paul Gilbert would return when they reformed in 2009. Billy Sheehan, who was with Talus and David Lee Roth. We talked about him when we did our David Lee Roth episode versus Sammy Hagar with Eat 'em and Smile versus OU812. No, we didn't do OU812. We did 5150, didn't we?
5150, yes,
yeah.
5150.
I was just thinking about the wordplay. And then Pat Torpy, who plays with Chris Impellitteri, which we have not talked about, but we need to do a guitar virtuoso episode at some point.
Yeah.
And then Matt Starr was the session drummer while Pat Torpy's health was declining. He did pass away in 2018, and that's why the band has gone on an indefinite hiatus. They do not want to play without him. Which is completely understandable. That's what we talked about earlier as well with, Adrenaline Mom? Didn't want to play without their other members? Or
No, Chickenfoot didn't want to play without Chad Smith.
That's true. Okay. I totally get that. When you have a certain chemistry, you don't want to play without your other members. So, They've put out 9 albums in their career, 3 of them gold and 3 of them platinum in Japan, and then 1 platinum record in the U.S. And I really wanted to talk about that because the world is bigger than just our country of the U.S. or where we're from, but we have listeners from all over, which I think is really cool, and to see kind of like how other people view certain bands, I think is really awesome as well. So this band, really blew up in Japan. Their first, I want to say it's 6 albums were either platinum or gold, which was their first run together. Mr. Big wasn't the biggest album, but Lean Into It is kind of where they took off. That was platinum in both Japan and the U.S. That was kind of like their moment to shine here. But Bump Ahead and Hey Man also scored platinum scores in Japan, and then Get Over It, Actual Size, and Mr. Big all were gold records. So are you familiar with Mr. Big?
Yeah, I mean, I was into Mr. Big. I liked that, Addicted to That Rush. Was it Green Tinted 60s Mind? Is one of their songs. I mean, they had some cool songs. The first album was pretty cool. Lean Into It was pretty cool as well. I mean, their downfall in the United States was the fact that they came out at the end of the 80s into the 90s.
Exactly.
So and now that I think about it, when you were talking about it and you talk about the success that they had in Japan, the funny thing is, and I've talked about this several times, but let me start that point with this. A lot of bands that found that their success was starting to wane should have tried to go elsewhere. Bands like Wasp have had a career in Europe this entire time. Band like Manowar has almost never come home. They're an American band from New York City, and they spend their entire life on the eastern side of Europe. Okay,
aren't they like from Valhalla or something?
Yes,
in their minds,
they're Vikings. No, in their minds they're from Valhalla. But it's so funny because they've spent their literally after the success of Fighting the World. You know, they went on world tour. They had a nice run there on Atlantic Records, and then they never came home after 1987. It was literally spending the rest of their career out in Europe, and I believe they've come to the United States on a couple of tours in the 2000s and 2010s, and that's it. Like maybe a 5 or 10 city tour tops, but they are huge in the eastern side of Europe. You know, so, and then they play all those big festivals and, you know, they play all the power metal festivals and all that stuff. So, but we're not here to talk about Manowar. My point being was that a lot of these bands in the 80s that were popular in the 80s should have tried to go to Japan because Japan, they didn't, at first, I guess you could say, didn't get grunge. They didn't care. They didn't care if you had a big show or you didn't have a big show. They just liked the music. And in a lot of cases, you know, the music was good. But, I mean, a band like Mr. Big was enormous over there. Okay, Dawkins huge in Japan. Okay, and I think that's where Dawkins was able to survive the 90s by going to Japan and doing things outside of the United States. You know, look, David Hasselhoff, Germany loves the Hoff.
That's how he survived the 90s.
That's how he survived the 90s because Knight Rider was done.
What about Baywatch Nights?
Oh, that's right. He had that. Oh, the Nights one. That was horrible. That was bad. All right. So anyway, Mr. Big had a big career in Japan. I get it, and you know, a lot of bands should have tried that. But unfortunately, the flip side to that is the thing that I've constantly talked about. These bands that did not succeed because they didn't put out good music. Whatever they want to say, grunge killed us. No, your shitty ass songs killed you. I'm sorry to say that, but that was the truth. I like Mr. Big. Paul Gilbert, amazing guitar player. Billy Sheehan, amazing bass player. Eric Martin, amazing vocalist. Pat Torpey, apparently amazing drummer, and they can't move on without him. And I get that. You know, you have this brotherhood. They've been together. I mean, for the most part, it was the original band. I don't know where Richie Kotzen fits into that whole thing.
He basically came in to finish up some stuff with, like, after Paul Gilbert left. They put out one album, and it just the chemistry wasn't there. And you know, it's not a whole lot different than when Richie Kotzen came into Poison. You know, they just didn't fit the chemistry.
He's just a bad chemist.
He's an odd man out.
Yeah. So, you know, they had their run in the U.S. and they had a huge run in Japan. That was good for them. I mean, I don't look at them as the same kind of supergroup because I think, you know, Racer X wasn't this big American band. You know, they were a small band, you know, that just happened to fall apart. And so their members were, you know, all over the place because obviously Jeff Martin went into Badlands, you know, and Paul Gilbert goes to Mr. Big. So there you have that. So they went their separate ways and, you know, but then again, we just talked about the fact that Badlands is a supergroup, so
I mean, you got big names like David Lee Roth. I mean, and not in the same place in the world, but in Pelletieri, you know, Chris and Pelletieri is huge.
That's true.
It just depends. So it's different perspectives. So who do you got next?
Okay, so the next band I wanted to talk about real quick here, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on the next few because we these, as successful as they were, we've got one good band that we want to talk about. But the one I want to mention right now is Stormtroopers of Death, SOD. And for those fans out there of Anthrax, you will know who SOD is. If you don't know who SOD is, you're probably going to get offended if you listen to their first album anyway. So you might,
Yes.
you know, and even the second album, you probably get offended at that one too. But they were basically a joke of a band. It was put together by Scott Ian and Charlie Benante from Anthrax. They were on downtime while their album was getting mixed for spreading the disease back in 1985. And so they called up, I don't know if they were doing some drawings or sketching some stuff, and they came up with some crazy, stupid lyrics. But they called up Danny Lilker, who had basically been fired the year before. And they called up their roadie. Well, he was their roadie, Billy Milano, and he asked them to sing, or they asked him to sing. And they came up with this completely out of the box, obnoxious, racist, against everybody band in SODs.
It was just being controversial just for the sake of it, just to piss everyone off. And therefore it's fine because it is equally just offensive to everyone.
Yes, exactly. I mean, at the time, stuff was happening in the Middle East, so they had their issues, but they also talked about other people too, Indians, American Indians, dead people, sexual jokes, sexual innuendo, all sorts of weird shit, stuff against women. I mean, it was just as obnoxious as they could make it, they made it. And it was just meant to be humor. And of course, one person, doesn't get the humor, and all of a sudden it becomes, super offensive to everybody. I think it was great. The first time I heard it, I was like, it was like some of the hardest and fastest stuff I had ever heard in my life. And I'm like, I'm not going to get into this stuff. But then as I got more and more into heavy metal, I realized this is pretty cool. So I liked it. They released a second album, Bigger Than the Devil. What was it, 14 years later?
14 years later. Yeah.
And that was really just this, another time like, hey, let's just get together, just hammer this out and do it. And when we say hammer it out and we talk about joke, these songs last a minute, they last 30 seconds. They did some songs. I mean, they did a cover of Diamonds Are Us. It lasted all of 3 seconds.
Yeah.
They did a tribute to Jimi Hendrix. It lasted all of 2 seconds. So things like that that's the fun part about it. They did a song that they put on the album called What's That Noise? And it literally is them fucking with Billy Milano in the studio and making a bunch of tape moving back and forth noises, almost like scratching on a turntable. Mm-hmm. They did it with the tape machine, moving the tape back and forth and getting this really crazy reaction out of Billy Milano. So, that's the stuff they did. And it's like got 30 songs or something like that in like 20 minutes. So, but Bigger Than Devil, isn't that the one that has the cover that's very similar to Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast? Yes. And then they had Rise of the Infidels, and they actually released a single called Seasoning the Abyss, which was a take on Seasons in the Abyss from Slayer. So they've done all sorts of crazy shit, and they're cool for that.
Yeah, they're just fun, and I think every album's been reviewed pretty well, just, as a tongue-in-cheek joke. And they just do what they want. I say it's a success story because they accomplished exactly what they wanted to accomplish with it.
It was piss people off.
Exactly.
I mean, for those of you Billy Milano went on to do M.O.D., which had a little bit of success in the mid to late 80s. Danny Lilker continued on with Nuclear Assault. And obviously, Charlie and Scott continued on with Anthrax. So they've all went their separate ways, and they all had their own versions of success over the years. So this is pretty cool. And then they never toured until 15 years later or 14 years, whatever it was. They didn't tour. They finally went on a tour. I think they did like 3 shows back in the 80s. Never did anything else. And they did a small tour, and they never left. Or I don't even know if it was a tour or if they just did a one-off show, but they basically, it was called Live at Budokan, and it was recorded in New York City. So it's pretty cool.
And as many of you probably know, Charlie Benante is going to be taking part of the Pantera reunion, and I think that's a nice segue into this next band that I want to talk about. So we're actually going to talk about 2 pretty quick, and they both have a Pantera connection. And the first one is going to be Down, which is Phil Anselmo's project with Pepper Keenan, Kirk Windstein, Bobby Landgraf, at Todd Strange, Rex Brown, Pat Bruders, Jimmy Bauer. So you're going to know Pepper Keenan from Corrosion of Conformity, Jimmy Bauer, drums from Corrosion of Conformity, and then Kirk Windstein was guitarist for Crowbar. Todd Strange was bass from Crowbar, and then obviously Rex Brown would take over for bass from Todd Strange for about 10 years. He was also from Pantera, and then Pat Bruders would move on to take bass, or the position of bass, from him. So pretty fun band if you like that kind of southern metal sound. They've released, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, I would say technically 4 albums, but the 4th Down album is 2 EPs. So they've released NOLA in 1995, Down 2, A Bustle in Your Hedgerow in 2002, Down 3, Over the Under in 2007, and then the Down 4 Part 1 EP in 2012, and the Down 4 Part 2 EP in 2014. So these guys are all real good friends. They continue to work on various projects together, including, like I mentioned earlier, Phil Anselmo and Rex Brown will be touring as Pantera in the next year, which I think is really cool. I know a lot of people are very divisive about it because of the nature of Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Ball have both passed away. But I think it's a nice tribute in a way, and the fans getting to hear those songs again in a live format, I think, is really cool. I think
the naysayers need to stick it.
Fair enough.
No, I mean, seriously, because if you don't want to go out there and hear it, you know what? Don't buy a ticket. Fine.
Exactly. Not everybody has to like everything. That's the thing that's missing.
Right. Let the people enjoy what they want to enjoy. And if people want to go out there and see the original singer, well, not the original singer, the original bass player.
Yeah, if you want to see Terry Glaze out there, you're going to be sorely disappointed.
Right. And the more famous singer, the one that actually, brought them the fame that they got, do the big Pantera hits with 2 of the most talented musicians on the planet who basically bow to Dimebag on a daily basis, okay? With Zakk Wylde and Charlie Benante, basically replicating, Vinny's drums. Dude, that is hands down. I'll be first in line if I could to get tickets to that. Okay, exactly. So if you think you don't want to hear it, you know what? Stay home. Don't bother. Listen, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to enjoy myself with my friends, you, Chris, and Matt. We're going to go see it. We're going to hang out. We're going to have a good time. Screw everybody else.
So the other one with the Pantera connection is Helya, who started in 2006 and has gone on an indefinite hiatus after 2021. This is kind of a mixture between Mudvayne, Nothing Face, and Damage Plan. So Chad Gray on vocals from Mudvayne, Greg Tribbett from Mudvayne on guitars, Tom Maxwell on guitars from Nothing Face, Jerry Montano on bass from Nothing Face. He would be replaced by Bob Zilla, who was Damage Plan's bassist, and then he would be replaced by Kyle Sanders. Vinnie Paul was their long-term drummer from the beginning until 2018 when he passed away from Pantera and Damage Plan. And then Roy Mayorga replaced him and he was drummer for Stone Sour and Nausea. They've put out 6 albums, one of which went gold, and that was their first album in 2007. That's hard to say. And then Stampede in 2010, Band of Brothers in 2012, Blood for Blood in 2014, Undeniable with the very annoying exclamation point for an I in 2016, and Welcome Home in 2017. So, like I mentioned earlier, Vinnie Paul unfortunately passed away in 2018. The band carried over his pre-production drums for that last album, but they did put out Welcome Home in 2019 posthumously after he passed away. They did continue on, like I said, until 2021, but Chad Gray's commitments with Mudvayne, if you've seen recently, actually, there's a pretty funny video. He falls during a song, and I'm trying to remember the name of the song, but it has to do with falling.
Not falling.
Not falling, right?
Yeah, that's a song.
He falls off the stage during Not Falling. The
irony.
The irony is funny. You never want anybody to get hurt falling, but of all the songs it could have been, that one.
He fucked himself up pretty good, too.
I know, right? That's unfortunate, but at least he's doing all right, and he wasn't so badly injured that he couldn't, continue on. Like Dave Grohl, who unfortunately broke his leg during one of the concerts, and then had to be brought back up on stage and sat in a chair and continued playing with a broken leg. So
you mean the giant throne that he sat on?
Yes, it was amazing. Much respect.
That he lent to Axl Rose when Axl Rose broke his foot after their first show?
He did. So Helya, it was a band that I'm not super familiar with. They weren't one that I really gravitated towards. But again, this is Southern metal, right out of the vein of what Vinnie Paul stood for, the brothers stood for, the Abbotts. And if you're a big fan of Southern metal, then definitely check out Helya, because it's going to be right up your alley. You hear those bands mention Mudvayne, Nothing Face, Damage Plan. You hear all of that in this band. So I know that they have a pretty big fan base. They continued on for 6 albums and did pretty well for themselves.
Touching on both bands, Down and Helya, which the funny thing is we're bringing them together because they have the Pantera connection, where one half of the Pantera was in Down, and the other half was Dimebag was in Helya, but it's more associated with the Abbott brothers than anything. And sort of like Damage Plan was the Abbott brothers with without Pantera, but hell, you can see the two sides of it. But the funny thing about this is that Down was essentially just a side project. I remember when it came out, Temptations Wings, super cool song. There's one other song on there that's pretty decent for me. Other than that, it's a sludgy, underproduced album. I think that's the way it's meant to be, and it's pretty cool. And they've made us. And I wouldn't, like you wrote in your notes, it's not necessarily a successful career so much as longevity. They've done a lot of stuff together. They've stayed together, and they've had guys come in and out of the band. But it's just meant to be a very loose project that once they start writing and they say, oh, yeah, this sounds a lot like Down. Let's do this. Boom. So that's the way that works. Hell yeah. I never got into Helya. I thought at first it was more of just kind of like a joke at first, but it was more serious to the guys in the band. I think it got better and better as time went along for the band, and they were getting to that point where they were going to be, kind of breaking through that next level, and then that's when Vinnie passed away. So they were right there on the cusp of getting to that next level. I actually got to see them the year before Vinnie passed away, which is pretty cool. I saw them in a small club here in Houston called the Warehouse. And so that was, I didn't get to see I didn't see the whole show because there was a problem that happened. My wife and I decided to leave a little bit early, but outside there was a smell of bleach that was permeating the air. And so I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they eventually had to shut the show down because of this thing. So we got out just in time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was really weird. I was there with Joel, who used to work with me, and him and I were big fans, and we wanted to go see Vinnie Paul and Helya. And so I was there. It was about probably 4 songs into Helya, 5 songs, and I'm like, all right, let's go. It wasn't really doing it for me, but then it kind of got shut down a few minutes later because of that smell.
Okay.
So I mean, both projects really cool. Like I said, Helya was on their way to get to that next level, but it ended up, not going forward because of the death of Vinny. I don't think they're ever going to get back together. I mean, I really, to me, Vinny was the driving force behind this.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
I think this is one of those bands that are just going to stay defunct and, enjoy what we have now. And that's it. All right. So we're going to end this on, the last band. You go ahead and take the lead on this one because I don't know a lot about them. I do know the first album, so why don't you go ahead and tell us about it?
Okay. So this is going to be A Perfect Circle, formed in 1994 through 2004, and then 2010 through present. This would be a side project for Maynard James Keenan, who joined Billy Howerdel, who was really the brainchild of this. Basically, he was the guitar tech for Tool, and he showed Maynard some of his songs, and Maynard said, I would love to sing for your stuff if you ever put a band together, so let me know. So he did that, and they got Troy Van Leeuwen. I don't know if I said that correctly, but he was on rhythm guitar.
I think it's supposed to be Van Leeuwen, but it's spelt Leeuwen. But who knows?
Leeuwen. Let's go with that. So he was on rhythm guitar initially, replaced by Danny Lohner from Nine Inch Nails, and then eventually replaced by James Iha from Smashing Pumpkins. So you're seeing some of the various bands and their notoriety here. Paz Linchanton on bass, eventually replaced by Geordie White, who was with Marilyn Manson. His other name that he's known as is Twiggy Ramirez. Matt McJunkins eventually replaced him and is their current bassist. He was the bassist for Pussifer before that. Josh Freese on drums. Josh Freese has been in 400 plus bands. I mean, he is. You probably see his name across hundreds of records. He's in the Vandals before that, and Jeff Friedel, who's their current drummer, actually is in. If you look at their band history, Josh Freese and Jeff Friedel have a lot of the same band history, which I thought was pretty interesting. They've put out 4 albums, one of which went platinum, with Mare de Noms in 2000, 13th Step in 2003, Emotive in 2004. Then they went on a hiatus, and then brought out Eat the Elephant in 2018. So fans of Tool probably can connect more with the first album. Then they kind of took a little bit different direction as they went on. But that first album was very popular. Like I said, they kind of went on hiatus to work on other projects. That would be Tool eventually reforming. Billy Howerdel has done some solo stuff. In fact, he just released a new solo album this year, and Maynard has now said, "I'd like to put this on hiatus again because he's focusing on Pussifer." So lots of different projects, lots of people from major bands. A little bit outside of our wheelhouse from the norm, But I think sometimes it's nice to bring in these bands that we don't normally talk about on these conversations as well, because, again, that first album was very popular in the metal community when I was, I would say, in high school, I guess, 2000. I remember this album coming out, and a lot of my friends that were fans of Metallica and fans of Tool and bands like that really got into this album as well. And they've had a pretty long career, even though they've taken breaks, but they've done very well for themselves.
I think for me, the Mare de Noms album is the one that I know. That's the one I actually have. It's an alternative Tool if you look at it that way, and not alternative in terms of being a different type of Tool. It is alternative version of Tool, because that song Judith, it might as well have been a Tool song. And that's part of the reason why I like it so much. But I was listening to some of it today, and I'm like, there's a ton of Tool relation. It's a ton of Tool observations. It sounds like that, and
it's less like the mathematical stuff and the songs that go on for 3 hours. It's more of like a song from beginning to end in 3 minutes, that you're more typical like alternative rock, alternative metal stuff.
Exactly. So I thought it was pretty cool. I like it, and they're one of those bands that just, every person in the band has a major project or not project so much that they have a major band that they are part of.
Another commitment.
Yeah. A major commitment compared to, this one, which is technically a side project.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that was a lot of bands tonight that we talked about. And just to go over some real quick, some other famous honorable mentions, some other famous supergroups. Fastway, which was an early supergroup, started in 1982. They ran until about 1992. That band started with Fast Eddie Clarke, which is ex-Motorhead, and Pete Way of ex-UFO. They put this band together. So they brought in the drummer Jerry Shirley from Humble Pie, and then they brought in an unknown singer, Dave King, which has now gone on to fame with Flogging Molly during this time. So they were pretty good. They were around, and they actually, got back together in 98, and then they got back together in 2007, and they were actually together doing it as a touring act up until Fast Eddie Clarke's death in 2018. And they actually have released 7 albums. Most of the albums that were worth a crap were from the 80s. Bad English, a lot of people know who Bad English was. John Waite, along with Neil Schon, another 80s Neil Schon project. Okay. They released 2 albums, one with Platinum. They had a couple of big hit ballads during the late 80s.
But not just Neil Schon, Dean Castronovo and and Jonathan Cain, both from Journey as well.
Oh, that's right, Jonathan Cain. So yeah, so you got Neil Schon from Journey, Jonathan Cain from Journey. Dean Castronovo would eventually become the drummer for Journey, and then John Waite, who had a successful solo career, but he was also with the Babies for a while, right? It was yeah. And isn't that where he knows John Cain from? Because wasn't John Cain in the Babies too? I think. So
yes,
it's a very strange connection there. So they got together. They put out a few albums, had some success, and then like all things with Neil Schon, they just kind of go away, and he goes back to Journey. So, also another big band, Damn Yankees, from 89 to 96, 98 to 2001, 2004, 2010. They put out 2 albums, 1 platinum, 1 gold. That was Tommy Shaw from Styx, Jack Blades from Night Ranger, Ted Nugent, and who was the drummer in that band? Was it still
Michael Cartellone?
Okay, yeah. What band was he in?
Leonard Skinner.
Ah, there you go. So that's where that little southern rock tinge comes in to play between him and Ted Nugent. Some other bands, Sons of Apollo, which is a band featuring Mike Portnoy and Billy Sheehan. Winery Dogs, which is Richie Kotzen and Billy Sheehan and Mike Portnoy. Temple of the Dog, I consider a supergroup. At the time, it was 2 members of Soundgarden and 3 future members of Pearl Jam, because I think at the time that they started, Pearl Jam had not become an official band yet. They were working together, but they weren't really Pearl Jam yet. But Eddie Vedder, Stone Gossard, and Mike McCready, and then eventually Matt Cameron, the drummer for Soundgarden, joined Pearl Jam. So it's like kind of all Pearl Jam.
And Jeff Ament.
Anyway, and Jeff Ament on bass. That's right. So that tells you. I think at the time that they did Temple of the Dog, Mike McCready was not the guitar player. He wasn't the lead guitar player yet in Pearl Jam. I think because of this project, he became their lead guitar player.
Okay.
Then there was a band called Over the Rainbow that started in 2008 that was basically featured former members of Rainbow doing Rainbow songs from every iteration of the band. They were strictly a touring act. They toured for 3 years, and the big thing about it, besides the fact that they were former members of Rainbow, Ritchie Blackmore's son was the guitar player, so that was the link to Rainbow besides the former members. And last but not least, one that you and I talked about earlier today, which is more modern than anything else, the Halo Effect, which was former members of In Flames.
So the Halo Effect is Michael Stana, who was the original lead singer, technically a contractor, I guess, at that point, because he wasn't an official member of the band. But he is known for his band Dark Tranquillity. Then you got Nicholas England, who had one stint in the band many years ago and then rejoined them, I would say, in 2014, 2013, right around there. He also did a side project called Passenger with a couple members of the band as well, too. So they all know each other. They're all friends. He worked with Anders Frieden, who was the vocalist for In Flames. And then you have Jesper Stromblad, who was the brainchild, the creator of In Flames, originally the drummer, played bass, guitar, you name it. He's a very talented musician, has dealt with his struggles with alcohol addiction over the last 10 years or so since leaving the band. Actually, before leaving the band, and that was the main catalyst for him leaving, but is finally kind of getting back into music. He's not touring full time, but he is writing a lot of, if not all, the music, and that's really nice to hear that he's kind of got the support from his band members and getting kind of back on the right track with his life. And you got Peter Iwers and Daniel Svensson, who I want to say both joined with the Colony album for In Flames, which we did an episode about as well. So it's all In Flames pedigree. So it's interesting to call them a supergroup, but they are, they even though they've played with In Flames before. Michael Stana is the singer and mostly known for Dark Tranquillity. So you got In Flames guys. Nicholas England had the band Ingle and Gardenian, which Gardenian had other members of In Flames in as well. They have this interweaving web of friendship that I think is really interesting. But yeah, technically they are a supergroup.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I had to put them in there and mention them. So cool. So that brings us to our big four for today. And the big four is going to be the big four supergroup songs. So we're basically picking our favorite song from one of these supergroups that we talked about tonight. Why don't you go first? I think I went first last week.
Okay. So I'll make this quick. These are all from bands we talked about today. My first one is Fields of Avalon off of Symphonia. When I first heard that song, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I was so excited for that project. And again, it just fizzled out very quickly and was very upsetting, but at the same time, great song. Great start to that album, too. My number 3 is Judith from A Perfect Circle. And a lot of the reason I picked this was because of nostalgia, because back when it came out, this song kicked so much ass, and it it was a lot different than a lot of the stuff I listened to, but I really liked it, and still to this day, I think it's a really good song. My number 2 is Like a Stone from Audio Slave. It's my favorite song by that band. It's a really awesome song with a lot of meaning behind it, and it just, if you haven't heard it, definitely check it out. It was some amazing guitar work, especially the solo from Tom Morello. Great song. And my number 1 is Slither from Velvet Revolver. That was the song that really got me hyped about that band. And man, what a great single off of that album. That first album, again, like we talked about before, just super fantastic, great song. And again, these are all, awesome songs, but I think Slither was just that one that it still sticks with me. I have it on my playlist. It'll come up every once in a while. I just love it like I heard it the first time. I'm very disappointed that you did not bring up or pick as one of your top 4 songs To Be With You from Mr. Big. I mean, it's heartbreaking to me. It was going to be all 4 slots, but then I thought that was unfair, and I reset.
It's unfair to me.
Yeah.
All right. No, I like your list, and actually we have some crossover, but at the same time, not completely.
Okay.
All right. So my number 4 song for me is going to be from SOD, and it is Sergeant D and the SOD. It is basically the second song on the album. The album starts with an intro. The album starts with an instrumental, which is the March of the SOD, and then goes into Sergeant D and the SOD. So it's just a great way to introduce the band to the world. Like I said, equal opportunity offenders. Song number 3 for me is a different Audio Slave song. It is Cochise. I just really love that. That song just hammers you in the head. It's so heavy. And people sit and say, well, how is that a heavy metal song? I mean, a heavy song if it's not a really heavy metal kind of song. But it is. I mean, you listen to it, it's just a pounding song. It's really good. Number 2 for me is Badlands song High Wire. I love that song. I used to be able to hit the high notes on that song when I was a very unknown singer. Still am.
But now we're glad you're an unknown singer. Zing.
No, now it's now my voice is shot. So, but I love that song. That song was great. I mean, and that's the song that Adrenaline Mob did, and even Adrenaline Mob's version could not hit the notes the same way that Ray Gillen hit it. And number 1 for me is the same as your number 1, Slither from Velvet Revolver. It's just a super cool song. I learned to play it on bass back when it first came out, and one of the most difficult songs I've ever had to learn to play on bass, and I don't know it anymore because I don't play bass much anymore. So there you have it.
All right. I like your list as well.
Well, cool. Thank you very much. All right, well, that's our big 4 supergroup songs, and this brings an end to the show. If you haven't done so already, this is the time to like, subscribe, and download the show on your favorite podcast platform so you can listen to us anytime, any place, anywhere.
And don't forget, you can interact with us by commenting on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can send us a DM as well. If you listen to us on YouTube, be sure to leave us a comment, or you can send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. So remember to tune into the next episode where we spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe, and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.